John Carmack, the co-creator of Doom, once famously said, "Story in a game is like a story in a movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important." In today's gaming landscape, this statement is just laughable. But in the strict confines of a Doom game, was he wrong? The creators of the franchise don't really seem to have an answer for that. Whether it's the story, the atmosphere, or even the gameplay, Doom has always struggled with its identity. In the 30 plus years since its original release, if you ask the question, "What is Doom?" the answer you'll get will depend on when you ask the question. Is it fast-paced or atmospheric? Is it a horror or an action game? Does it have an emphasis on its story? You can answer all these questions however you want, and you wouldn't be wrong. Because Doom's biggest battle was never with any of its demons, but with its own self. So sit back, relax, and let me tell you the story of Doom's 30-year journey to find its identity. Doom's identity problems started with its development. Our story begins in 1992, not with Doom, but with the release of Wolfenstein 3D. Wolfenstein 3D wasn't the original first-person shooter, but it was the first one that didn't suck. It set the baseline for all future games in the genre. However, looking at its gameplay, it feels like something is missing. It seems to lack a bit of energy. A lot of the environments and enemies are a bit samey, and in general, it feels as if this formula needed just a few tweaks to really blow up. During this time, id approached 20th Century Fox with a proposition: the creation of a licensed game based on the movie Aliens. While id would eventually back away from the deal due to wanting more creative control, the idea stuck with them. The alien invasion angle appealed to the studio, but since aliens were off the table, they went with the next logical option: hell. Doom would be a cross between Aliens and Evil Dead. Unlike the massive and often faceless corporations of today, id Software was just a small group of people. Spearheaded by programmers John Carmack and John Romero, game designer Tom Hall, artist Adrian Carmack, and musician/lawyer Bobby Prince, id would begin work on the franchise that would eventually change gaming forever. Tom Hall took it upon himself to write the Doom Bible. It contained lore and an elaborate story spanning 6 episodes that would see the Doom guy get involved in all sorts of adventures. This was all scrapped, however, as the rest of the team wanted a much simpler story. This is where John Carmack said his quote about stories in games that we discussed in the intro. Some parts of Hall's document would make it into the final release, but the glass had already been broken. Adding to the distress, Hall's more realistic level design philosophy was deemed flat and uninspiring by the rest of the crew. With the rest of it disapproving both his levels and his story, Hall was eventually forced out of the company just 10 weeks before Doom's release. Sandy Peterson was brought in, and he overhauled each and every one of Hall's levels just before the game launched. Peterson himself later defended Tom Hall's levels, saying that he didn't have the same access to textures, features, and weapons as he did. This situation with Tom Hall was only the beginning of Doom's weird relationship with stories. Doom doesn't really have one. You only get a bit of text at the end of each episode, and that's about it. Not that Doom really needed a story though. While Hall's pitch seems incredibly detailed, I don't think the original Doom would have been a better game with a complex story in it. I don't know what story you could tell that wouldn't get undermined by the character archetype of the Doom guy and the type of game Doom is in general. I think Doom's lack of story was perfect for it. In a way, the game's story was in part replaced by its music. Doom's music tells you everything you need to know about a level. If it's fast-paced and frenetic, you'll be raising hell in, well, hell. And if it's atmospheric, you'll be entering a confusing maze. id brought in Bobby Prince for the game's soundtrack, and Romero famously gave him a bunch of heavy metal CDs for him to quote-unquote take inspiration from. This is where the story gets a bit murky. Bobby Prince didn't make covers of a lot of famous heavy metal songs, he just really heavily borrowed from them. Prince would use a bunch of riffs made by some very popular bands like Metallica, Slayer, and Pantera. Despite all the borrowing, I still need to highlight just how impressive Prince's work was, considering the limited technology available to him. And funnily enough, the game's identity class extended here as well. Prince didn't really want to create a metal soundtrack, not just due to copyright though. Prince felt that more atmospheric tracks would be a better fit for the game. And while the team originally disagreed with him, they did eventually figure out that some levels did work better with Prince's slower paced tracks. So the stage was set for December 10th, 1993. And while I'm sure the guys over at id knew they were making something great, I don't think anybody could have predicted the tsunami they were about to hit the industry with. Doom was an unmitigated success. It made as much money in its first day as Wolfenstein 3D made in its first month. And being profitable is one thing, but the influence Doom had on the industry was unforeseen. It spawned dozens of clones. Heretic, Outlaws, Duke Nukem 3D, Star Wars The Dark Forces, Marathon, and hundreds more were all directly influenced by Doom. It got to a point where since the term first-person shooter hadn't been coined yet, all these games were called Doom clones. But after more than 30 years, has Doom stood the test of time? Surprisingly, the answer is yes, although it does have some major flaws. Now, let's address this before we move further. Is it unfair to criticize a 30-year-old game that was a pioneer in gaming? Absolutely, but I'm going to do it anyways. Doom is indeed credited for either inventing or popularizing a lot of things not just in the FPS genre, but in gaming in general. Things like speedrunning and multiplayer gaming can find their roots here. And yeah, even to this day, playing Doom is still fun. Its core gameplay loop of making everything that's moving not move anymore is simple but very effective. Guns have a very satisfying feel to them, with the shotgun being the standout. That thing has the range of a sniper. There's also a surprising amount of enemy variety. Every enemy somehow feels appropriately balanced and placed always alongside other enemies that make for a tough but fair challenge. Doom is at its best when you're tasked with figuring out a combat challenge. Whether you're in a tight room with lots of enemies or have to deal with demons from a variety of distances, running around blasting demons with a shotgun just never gets old. Doom is at its worst, however, when you have to explore a level. Exploration in Doom sucks. You're usually tasked with finding a variety of color-coded keys in order to proceed. But sometimes, the process of getting those keys is so obtuse that you can get stuck going around same environments for minutes on end. I had to use YouTube a bunch of times during my playthrough of the early Dooms because some of these levels just didn't want you escaping them. How did people beat this in the 90s? I do understand that we are still in the era where, due to technical limitations, games were by design smaller in scope. So in order to combat that and to avoid making consumers feel robbed by playing a 30-minute game, developers made their games extra hard. Doom is probably one of the easiest games of the era, but it trades in brutal difficulty for annoying exploration. I will concede, however, that Doom's graphics in the 90s were legitimately cutting edge, so I can see how people would be more willing to explore these levels, but looking at it from a modern perspective, it's absolutely not my cup of tea. Doom got amazing reviews back in the day. PC Gamer UK called it the third best PC game of all time 5 months after its release. PC Zone called it the best arcade game ever. Edge praised its graphics and level design for some reason, but criticized it for not being able to talk to the demons. And as funny as this quote may be, it's surprisingly relevant for the state of the franchise today. Despite not being able to talk to demons, Doom was a massive success, and for their next game, id had only one place to go. After the success of Doom, id was under immense pressure from the publisher to put out a sequel. With limited time to spare, I can only imagine the meeting at id's headquarters going like, what if we took Doom, but more? Yeah, Doom 2 is more Doom. We got a few more enemy types and the super shotgun. Honestly, the super shotgun having an entire game made around it is understandable and I'm here for it. It's probably one of the coolest weapons ever made. On the gameplay side of things, while combat is pretty much the same as Doom, id for whatever reason decided to double down on the obtuse maze-like level design. If about half the levels of Doom had that problem, nearly every level of Doom 2 feels this way. The game constantly goes out of its way to confuse you and to set a trap for you, and it's pulling a lot of cheap tricks to do it. Like in one level, the only way to proceed was by opening a door, turning around, and going through another door that secretly opens only when you open the other door. Just annoying stuff that really takes away from the core gameplay loop. When Doom 2 hits its stride, it's probably even better than the original, but there are so many moments where it gets it in its own way. The original Doom is a lot more consistent. It doesn't reach the heights of Doom 2, but it also doesn't have the massive dips in quality that its sequel has. Still, Doom 2 was received very positively. Not as well as the original, obviously, but that would be a nearly impossible task. However, some cracks were appearing in its armor. In An Issue of Dragon, David Cook wrote, "If you need to have more Doom, get this." See, it's not just hindsight. People realized very early on that this was just more Doom. But even more important would be a review of the game on an issue of Next Generation, where the reviewer said, now that the first-person interface has become the design of choice for the entire industry, id will need to find new innovations, or it will quickly find it's playing catch-up in its own game niche. Truly prophetic words for what's about to come. id probably thought that they got everything they could out of Doom, so they decided to move on to a new project, Quake. Quake would go on to become another critically acclaimed game for id, revolutionizing 3D graphics in the process. But what about Doom? They couldn't just leave so much money on the table. So in 1996, the same year Quake was released, we had the release of Final Doom. I won't be covering Final Doom as it's basically just a compilation of fan levels that were commercially released. As many rightfully pointed out at the time, there were so many fan-created levels for the first two Dooms that paying for them just felt wrong. A year later, we had the release of Doom 64 by Midway. Obviously a Nintendo 64 exclusive, due to the console's technical limitations, not as many enemies could be on screen at the same time as the Doom games on PC. So to compensate, guess what Midway tripled down on? Obtuse level design. My favorite. As silly as it may sound today, the original Dooms were considered to be a bit scary and tense. With how these games look today, it's very much something that you had to be there to experience. Midway chose to lean on that tension heavily. Doom 64 is a lot slower paced than the originals, and the end result is a mostly boring game to play. Enemies don't really pose much of a threat, and slaying them isn't exciting either. The game was graphically impressive for its time, being the first game in the franchise to change the sprites for the demons and redesigning a lot of the weapons. The plasma rifle and chainsaw look amazing in Doom 64, but others like the shotgun feel like a massive downgrade. This is the only game of the franchise that I didn't beat in preparation for the video. I got about halfway through it until I reached a level that cheaply killed me with a lava pit, and that's where I drew the line. I withstood it being boring, but wasting even more of my time with cheap death traps was the last thing I wanted to experience. I feel like this is the first time in the franchise's history where either due to technical limitations or any other reason, Doom was misunderstood. Yes, exploration was a part of the original games, but it wasn't their strongest aspect. Leaning on it just didn't really mess well with the rest of the franchise. The game received a lukewarm response. Critics generally liked it, but Doom fatigue had become a thing, and a lot of them just didn't see the reason in buying Doom 64 if you had played the originals. Thankfully, id would be back on the helm of the franchise with an entirely new direction, for better or worse. After the release of Quake 3 Arena, the members of id couldn't agree on what to make next. Most of the staff members, including John Carmack, looking at the buzz around games like Return to Castle Wolfenstein, wanted to remake the original Doom. But two of id's owners, Adrian Carmack and Kevin Cloud, who controlled over 50% of the company, believed that id Software needed to stop constantly revisiting the same intellectual properties. So, an ultimatum was made towards the two by John Carmack and a large portion of the people working at id. We are working on Doom for the next project unless you fire us. After the two parties talked things out and fired Paul Steed, an artist that was heavily in favor of the remake, a compromise was reached. Doom 3 would be made, but instead of a remake, it would be a reboot. That means that the story would start off completely fresh, erasing the riveting plot up to that point of man goes to hell, hell desperately tries to send him back. id faced a lot of challenges with Doom 3. As I said in the early parts of the video, Doom was very influential, and some of the games that it influenced, like Halo and Half-Life, evolved its formula in a number of ways. So with Doom 3, for the first time in the franchise's history, it was Doom that was following in other games' footsteps. Remember how id wanted to make an Aliens game? Well, Doom 3 is that game. Specifically, it feels like a mix between Aliens and Half-Life. Like Doom 64 before it leaned heavily into the scarier parts of the originals. So much so that Doom 3 is a full-on horror game. Your character moves very slowly, and each enemy is a threat if not dealt with properly. The damage that weapons do has also been toned down to be less effective. The shotgun is no longer a sniper like in the originals, now almost always an unsatisfying 2-hit kill unless you're standing right next to the demon. This is a very competent shooter, but it isn't Doom. While I do understand why both id and Midway went for the scarier approach, it still baffles me that they didn't choose to make a high-octane shooter instead. I played the remastered edition and I enjoyed it a lot more than I expected. However, I disliked how many cheap tricks it uses to scare you. There are so many times where enemies will spawn behind you or will camp behind doors or corners you can't see just to jump scare you. A few times is fine, but the game does it so frequently that it becomes the norm. And this is a problem that depends on the person, but I still struggled to find Doom 3 scary because I knew that all my problems were 2 shotgun shells away from not being problems. The game is great at building tension, but it struggles to carry that momentum when enemies do appear on screen. The story is also quite generic. The evil scientist that works for the Wayland Yutani type corporation wants to unleash hell onto Earth and you stop him. How original. Graphically though, that game was a marvel for its time. If you ignore the fact that every single character is either bald or has really short hair, the game looked amazing. However, this did apparently come at the cost of subtitles. For whatever reason, the game has none of them. A weird decision, judging by the fact that a big part of the game is listening to audio logs, and the remaster didn't bother to fix that. Despite its problems, it's still a decently fun time. Weapons may be weaker but are still fun to use, and the general atmosphere is immaculate. It does get old though. I did feel like it overstayed its welcome by a few hours. Critically, it was received very well. Most critics adored the graphics and atmosphere, while the response to the gameplay was a bit more mixed. But regardless of what I think of it or what critics believed, Doom 3 was released at the wrong time. 2004 was a very crucial year for gaming, with games like GTA San Andreas, Half-Life 2, Resi 4, and Halo 2 all releasing in that year. And between those games, Doom 3 feels like the odd one out. It never reached the popularity of San Andreas or Halo 2, as a shooter it wasn't better than Half-Life 2, and as a horror game, Resident Evil 4 was out there revolutionizing the genre. Doom 3 feels out of place in this era of games. And to add salt to the wound, an even bigger shift was coming to first-person shooters. Up until now, if I asked you to tell me what Doom's identity is, what would you tell me? So far, we've had 2 games that are mixed between action and exploration, 1 very atmospheric game, and a full-on horror game. In the aftermath of Doom 3's release, id also had to find the answer to that same question. And initially, they found the wrong one. In 2007, 14 years after Doom's release, Call of Duty Modern Warfare would once again change how first-person shooters were made. It standardized so many things: regenerating health, reloading, a variety of multiplayer stuff, a general slower pace, and now every game, not just shooters, for whatever reason, now had to be brown. After COD 4, almost every first-person shooter copied it, and Call of Duty became the face of the genre. You were still holding a gun, but modern shooters couldn't be further away from what Doom was. During that time, id was making raids, which wasn't really anything more than okay. So they decided that it was time to revisit Doom, and they almost fell into the trap of making another modern shooter. Doom 4's development would start in 2007, but it was quickly put on the back burner until Raids was released in 2011. After that, it was all hands on deck for Doom 4. id during that time was also bought out by ZeniMax, Bethesda's parent company, but there were still so many problems to solve. The original direction was making Doom 4 another modern shooter, a Call of Doom as it was called at the time. But by 2013, things were not going well. Kotaku made a piece about how the game was in development hell and mismanaged. This, alongside other reasons, all led to key id figures like John Carmack leaving the company, and a new guard took the task of forging a new path for the franchise. Game director Marty Stratton and creative director Hugo Martin would be the 2 key figures to lead the franchise forward. The original Doom was mostly scrapped, and the game was revealed as simply Doom in 2014. Doom 2016 would use the original Dooms as a blueprint from the gameplay design all the way to the art design. But when we got gameplay of it in E3 2015, it looked terrible. This once again wasn't Doom. Even Doom 3 looked quicker than it, and it was a horror game. People still got very excited about the game, mind you, but I feel like if we got the game from that trailer, we would be having a very different conversation right now. Add in a poor multiplayer beta launch and a 9-year development cycle, and Doom 2016 wasn't exactly inspiring confidence ahead of its release. Everything changed, however, once people started playing it. Doom 2016 is also a horror game, and that's a dumb decision you might think, but they made one small tweak. Now the horror is you. It may have taken 23 years, but somebody finally made a game based on Doom's core gameplay loop and not its exploration or horror elements. Doom 2016 is amazing top to bottom. Obviously the main reason for that is the gameplay. It takes the original's gameplay spirit and modernizes it with everything we learned over the past 2 decades. While Doom 3 released in the wrong time, Doom 2016 launched at the perfect time. A lot of people were starting to get sick and tired of the modern FPS formula. Games like COD never went away like Doom and are still very lucrative, but I feel like the gaming community was more than ready for a return to basics. And what a return it was! Playing Doom 2016 for the first time, it's initially difficult to shake off the modern FPS tendencies. You know, reloading, crouching, hiding behind cover, and all the rest. But once you understand it, once it clicks, it's hard to go back. Take glory killing for example, a new mechanic introduced in Doom 2016 where if you can get a demon's health low enough, you can perform a pre-animated takedown on them. It also happens to be your main source of healing. When you're low on health, Doom forces you to be aggressive, because that's the name of the game. Having a combat system based on pre-animated takedowns sounds like a horrible idea. In most games, they look cool the first few times around, but they get old very quickly. In Doom 2016, they're done so quickly that it's all part of the combat's brilliant flow. You also get a double jump, which really helps the combat out, and it seems everything done in the gameplay side of things has the purpose to keep it as fast-paced as possible. Most importantly, it doesn't get in the way of itself. Older Doom games would have 2 minutes of fun combat, sometimes followed by 5 minutes of boring exploration. Doom 2016's level design is specifically designed to be pure action. There's never a dull moment, but somehow without it feeling overwhelming. Even though most of the game is action, there's never too much of it. The constant stream of new weapons, upgrades, and combat challenges you get make it so the game never gets old. Of course, it wouldn't be a Doom video if I didn't talk about Mick Gordon. After building a name for himself, doing the scores for Killer Instinct, Need for Speed Sift, and the seminal El Tigre: The Adventures of Manny Rivera, Gordon was picked up not for Doom, but for another old franchise being revived, Wolfenstein. Mick Gordon did a great job on the soundtrack, and there were more than a few standout pieces, like the main theme of the New Order and his brilliant rendition of The Partisan. Gordon seemed like a good pick for the job, but I don't think anybody realized just how good he would be. Gordon did a GDC talk on his involvement in Doom, and it's a great watch. It's about an hour of him explaining his process. Very nerdy stuff, but if you have any interest in finding out how music works not only in Doom but in games as a whole, that's the video you need to watch. id initially did not want Gordon to use guitars in his soundtrack, and while in hindsight this may sound crazy, the reasoning behind it is not wrong. They feared that over-reliance on guitars would make the soundtrack feel generic, so Gordon started working on a purely synth-based soundtrack. But Gordon wanted more, and so he found many loopholes to his guitar problem. One of them was especially interesting. The man used a synthesized chainsaw for a track, and it's somehow one of the best in the game. Now, dear viewer, if you haven't played Doom 2016, first of all, thank you for sticking this far into the video, and second of all, where do you think this track plays in the game? Is it A, the final boss fight, B, somewhere in the middle, or C, in the intro mission? Well, if you said any of these answers, you would be wrong, because the actual answer is D, the main menu. Gordon's soundtrack is metal as metal gets, and he shows that off from the moment you turn the game on. A few years ago, Liam Triforce made a video on how even though he couldn't scientifically prove it, Doom's music made you play better. I do agree with that, and I think a big reason why is that you don't want to let the music down. When the music is cool, you want to be cool, and the only way to do that is by playing well. You don't want to disappoint Gordon's music. But still, after all the synthesizers and the chainsaws, Gordon strongly felt like the missing ingredient to elevate the soundtrack was guitars, so he went to id to convince them. id allowed it, and the result speaks for itself. Guitars take Doom's soundtrack from great to incredible. What's not incredible is the story. It's interesting how it's handled. Bootleg Wayland Yutani is back, this time finding that hell is the perfect new cheap energy source. That obviously backfires, and demons are taking over the station in Mars. The emergency failsafe for that event is the Doomslayer. The rest of the story happens around the Slayer and not to him, if that makes sense. There is a story going on, but he doesn't feel like an active participant. Even at the beginning of the game, someone tries to give some expository dialogue and he just breaks the monitor from where the dialogue is coming from. Id is distinctly telling the player to not care about the plot, and it works. Well, for the first half of the game. Doom 2016 eventually relents and forcefully sits you down to tell you its story. No, literally, there is a section in the game where you have to sit in a room for what feels like an eternity to listen to an exposition dump. It's not something that will ruin your experience by any means, but why? The cool thing about the first half of Doom 2016 is how it subverted expectations. Pretty much every major release nowadays has to have some sort of story, and Doom rejected that, and it did so in a way that was cool. The Doomslayer is not there to listen to anybody's orders, he's not there to listen to exposition, he's just there to save the station in his own way. It's not award-winning material, but for the type of game Doom is, it absolutely works. Backing out of it in the latter half of the game wasn't that detrimental here, but it was a sign of things to come. The rest of the game is the incredible demon slaying and some very mediocre in-between platforming segments. I mean, the platforming is fine, I just hate that you immediately die if you fail at it. I must have had more deaths trying to do platforming stuff than in actual combat. Both critics and players loved Doom 2016, besides that very questionable IGN review. Even more importantly, Doom 2016 inspired so many indie developers. So much so that it created a new subgenre called boomer shooters, or movement shooters as I prefer. In the years to follow, Steam was flooded with indie movement shooters. Games like Dusk or Ultrakill became very popular, and to this day the genre is still doing very well. Even so, according to an interview that Stratton and Martin gave on NoClip, they were partially unhappy with Doom 2016. They felt like they played it too safe, that they were too afraid of a repeat of Doom 3, and partially, I think you can see that in the game too. Doom 2016 will sour you with health and ammo, even though it gives you the means to get them by yourself. Despite the reboot being a major success on every level, id was once again preparing to take the franchise to a completely new direction. id would go on to start development for a sequel to Doom 2016 called Doom Eternal. The motto behind that game's development was, what if instead of giving the player a power fantasy, we made him earn it? Stratton and Martin decided that while Doom would be even faster paced than its prequel, it would also be a lot more strategic. Doom Eternal is my favorite shooter of all time. The move to more strategic gameplay was perfect for me. Every demon has a very clear weakness, and if you want to do well in the game, you need to take advantage of it. Now, this was a polarizing decision at the time. People were split into two camps. People that preferred the more complicated new way, and people that preferred the simpler old way of Doom 2016. Both camps have valid arguments, but I personally prefer the new way. It demands a lot from you, but once you get good at it, there's very little that compares to it. I do enjoy Doom 2016's simplicity, but there's just something so satisfying in clearing an arena by systematically targeting each and every enemy's weakness. You also get a dash button, which manages to make the gameplay even more frenetic, while also constantly asking you to make important decisions every few seconds. Now you are almost fully in charge of your health and ammo. There's no other way to get it other than glory killing or chainsawing your enemies. id was fully confident in itself, and in turn was fully confident in the player's abilities. Remember how in the Doom 2 part of the video, I said that the Super Shotgun is arguably the coolest video game weapon of all time? Well, the Doom Eternal Super Shotgun is definitely the best video game weapon of all time. You get a shotgun with a grappling hook. It's one of the best ideas anybody has ever had in gaming history, and I don't see how any other weapon can beat it. And I haven't even mentioned the fantastic soundtrack by Mick Gordon. For me, it's somehow even better than Doom 2016's, and that's a very high bar to clear. Just like it really felt like Gordon came into his own here. From slower paced tracks to adrenaline-filled ones, top to bottom, it's a brilliant soundtrack. Platforming was also back, this time with an increased emphasis placed on it. Since falling off the map isn't an instant death anymore, platforming is fine. It just gives the player a small break before throwing them into the next combat arena. For me, Doom Eternal has two major flaws: Marauders and the story. My problems with Marauders aren't what you'd probably think I'd say. They're not difficult to fight. Once you figure out the trick needed to beat them, they're quite easy actually. My problem is that they demand your attention. Since they're practically immune to damage until they attack you, they're the ones that need to go down first before you move on with the rest of the enemies. They're fine to fight, but I feel like you have to deal with them before you can go back to having fun. I think they easily could have been removed from the game and nothing would have been missed. My other issue is with the story. Parts of the story I really enjoy. The main villain gives off a real rated R Power Rangers vibe and I'm fully on board with that. It's light, it's self-aware, and it's perfect for the game Doom Eternal is. The Slayer is a great character for having others bounce off him. Seeing other people react to him and his caveman-like antics is genuinely funny.
You can't just shoot a hole into the surface of Mars.
5 minutes later.
What doesn't work is everything surrounding the Doomslayer's origin story. You get to find out a lot of information about him during the story, but I struggle to care about that. The problem also stems from the fact that id themselves specifically told us not to care back in Doom 2016. I don't get why they made a sudden 180 here. Again, it's not enough to be a deal breaker by any means, just a creative decision I really don't agree with. Despite polarizing fans a bit, Doom Eternal was universally acclaimed. Unfortunately, however, Marauders were not the worst thing to come out of Doom Eternal. As a pre-order bonus for Doom Eternal's Collector's Edition, fans were promised the game's soundtrack. But when fans received it, they started noticing that it was of a lot lower quality from Gordon's previous work. Not necessarily the artistic quality of the tracks themselves, but in terms of mixing, compression, and other technical stuff. A short while after the OST's release, Marty Stratton jumped onto Reddit to basically shift the blame for the OST's delayed and technical mishaps onto Mick Gordon. Gordon's response to this? Absolutely nothing. Pure radio silence. So Stratton's right and case closed, right? Well, 2 years after Stratton's post, Gordon had a response, and what a response it was. Gordon disputed everything said about him in the Reddit post and had extensive evidence like screenshots, emails, and even metadata to back him up. Gordon alleges that he made a lot of music that was not intended to be used, as id themselves rejected it. He then proceeds to allege that all of the music he made was used in the game, but he was only paid for half of it. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. He published his statement on Medium, and I'd urge anybody interested in the situation to go read it. It's very long, but it's Gordon's complete recounting of his experience working on Eternal. Bethesda responded a few days later by saying that it had the evidence to refute Gordon's claims, but said that it will use it if needed and in the appropriate venue. Since then, there haven't been any updates. We can probably assume that the matter was settled behind closed doors. But if what Mick is saying is true, my question would be, why? Music is such an important aspect of games. Even more so for Doom, that specifically relies on its combination of gameplay and music to hook you in. The franchise existed and will continue to exist without Gordon, but it's just baffling to me why you would sever ties with a person that made music that was universally beloved and in this way. We all lost from this situation. Gordon and Doom were one of those rare instances where both composer and franchise were perfect for each other. So to see this relationship end in this way, it's truly sad. Gordon obviously did not work on the game's DLC. Instead, Andrew Hulsholt and David Levy were brought in, and they did a great job. Both Levy's UAC Atlantica and Hulsholt's Blood Swamps are truly excellent Doom tracks. While I do prefer Gordon's style a bit more, I would have been more than happy to have the duo back for Doom's next installment, The Dark Ages. But for whatever that reason may be, the soundtrack for The Dark Ages was made by Finishing Move. We'll talk about them in the next chapter. To their credit, it did not stop innovating. For better or worse, The Dark Ages is a very different experience from both Doom 2016 and Eternal. But what does this mean for the franchise's identity? Let me be crystal clear right out of the gate. I think that Doom The Dark Ages is a really good game. I also think that it's a step below its two predecessors. The Dark Ages gameplay is excellent. It's slower paced than the other two games, but slower like how a Lamborghini is slower than a Formula 1 car. It's still very fast paced, just not at the breakneck speed of the previous two installments. This time, there's a bigger emphasis on the Slayer's newly acquired shield. Be it throwing it, parrying, or shield bashing, the shield gives a completely new feel to Doom's gameplay. It works. The Dark Ages gameplay is surprisingly easy to pick up. You can immediately start doing some incredible looking combos right from the start. A lot of this is due to an increased emphasis on melee combat. You can now punch demons in the face, and when chained with parrying and shotgun blasts, it's a lot of fun. I think that whichever of Doom's more recent combat systems is better is more of a matter of preference rather than a matter of quality. Each combat system has its own pros and cons, and it's up to you which one you prefer. But for how good the Dark Ages combat is, the game does have some problems. Specifically bloat. Bloat in its mechanics and bloat in its story. Besides the core gameplay loop, which thankfully is the majority of the game, there's also dragon riding, mech fighting, and turret sections. I understand that Doom games need a way to pace themselves. You can't just have combat arena after combat arena, because that would become tiring very quickly. But the Dark Ages falls into a similar trap that Spider-Man 2018 fell into, where in an attempt at pacing, they both replaced incredibly fun gameplay loops with boring segments. Riding the dragon is a spectacle. Fighting with your mech is a spectacle. They both looked really cool in the trailers, but neither has any mechanical depth and their novelty wears out very quickly. I think the game is worse with these things in it, and I'd very much appreciate it if they were kept far away from future installments. But it doesn't stop here. The story is the biggest offender in terms of bloat. In a lot of ways, it's the Doom Bible all over again. The Dark Ages is a prequel to its predecessors, and it tells a medieval fantasy story. That's fine and all, the setting is interesting, but for some reason, the story is so serious all the time. I'm sorry, but when your protagonist is a silent killing machine that doesn't care about anything other than slaying demons, that probably won't lend itself to a serious story. As weird as it may sound, the existence of the Slayer himself is comedic. He stands out like a sore thumb when he meets other people, and that's funny. For the most part, Doom Eternal understood that. The Dark Ages did not. He's surrounded by all these characters with personalities that would struggle to stand out against a used napkin, and it's just not interesting. Why does this entire thing feel like he's working an office job? The Slayer enters the battlefield only when and wherever he's told to. What happened to the Renegade that would break the norms of gaming just because they didn't fit him? If you're going to add a story, at least make it good. This was just a generic fantasy plot. The reviewer from Edge 30 years ago got his wish. The demons talk now. I hope he's happy. It baffles me how much we've regressed from the early hours of Doom 2016. And unfortunately, the story is not the only thing that's regressed. The music in the game just didn't do it for me. Now, I would not want to be in finishing moves position. Having to follow some of the best soundtracks of all time would be an impossible task for almost anyone. And some tracks here, like the menu music or Infernal Chasm, are really good. But a lot of the soundtrack feels generic. Remember how over a decade ago, id didn't want guitarists to avoid feeling generic? Well, it feels like Finishing Moves soundtrack has this exact problem. It's a good metal soundtrack, but I feel like it's something I could find anywhere. Meanwhile, even dating back to Bobby Prince, the soundtracks of all the older games felt uniquely like Doom. And still, I like most of this game. It just annoys me that besides its music, a lot of its problems seem avoidable. I can guarantee you that there was so much blood, sweat, and tears that were poured into creating the dragon and all the extra stuff. However, I think that not only the development of this game would have been a lot cheaper and quicker, but I feel like the Dark Ages would have been so much better without them. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think the franchise is in a bad place or anything. It's not dying, but I do think it's the least culturally dominant it has been in a long time. The Dark Ages kinda got lost in the shuffle when it launched. I don't think it had the industry in a temporary chokehold like its predecessors. It wasn't nominated for Game of the Year, and it wasn't a particularly controversial decision either. I do think that the franchise is in need of a shakeup, and for it to be successful, the developers need to give an answer to the question posed at the start of the video. What is Doom? Even after playing all the games in the franchise, it's a difficult question to answer. To me, Doom should embrace less being more. In an age where games constantly feel the need to be bigger and bigger, I fully understand why id would feel compelled to add more stuff to their games. However, I think instead of adding things to make the game longer, id should make a very tightly paced 6 to 8 hour game that's infinitely replayable. Because that's what I think Doom is. A fast-paced shooter that's light on story and musically brilliant. You can format the shooting however you want, but adding anything more will only lead to diminishing results. Doom has always been at its best when setting the trends, and in order to reclaim its throne, it needs to stop following the industry and go back to showing it how it's done. Thank you for watching the video, and thank you for 1300 subscribers as well. The recent support you guys have shown in the past few videos has been amazing, and I can't thank you enough for that. If you want to learn more about another franchise in search of its identity, you can click here to watch how Dying Light fumbled its future. See you in the next one.